Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. So around a week ago, I hit Master Tier on the NA server playing on 200 ping. And in this video, I wanted to kind of give you guys an overview of, why did I do this in the first place? What are some of the difficulties, beyond the obvious stuff of playing on 200 ping? What champs are good on high ping if you guys play on high ping? And kind of talking a little bit about like mechanics and stuff in general, as well as like how the NA server was. So there's going to be quite a lot in this video, and I will timestamp that all below. So first, as kind of a general overview of like what it actually took, I think we played a little over 40 games. I also played some games on this account at the end of last season. So you can see here I was in Plat 1, but I had very good MMR, so you can see the champs I played there. This season, though, I played, I guess this is what, 42? Yeah, 42 games here. Overall, most played was Galio Lissandra by quite a big margin. And then after that, there was a bunch of, kind of smaller ones played. So I experimented a lot. And I guess, like, why did I do this in the first place? There was a couple reasons. So the initial reason I first started playing on the NA server was because the OCE queue times are very long. If you guys ever watched my stream, sometimes if I queue on my main account, especially if I queue at, like, not peak hour, I might be in queue for, like, 20 minutes or something. Sometimes even longer. So that's obviously not very fun. I don't like playing queue simulator. And the nice thing about NA is that the queues are really, really fast, and it allows me to play earlier in the day. So it's something I kind of wanted to experiment with. Like how viable is it to play and stream on the NA server? And I think turns out it's like reasonably viable. Obviously, it does kind of limit your champion choices a lot and the kind of things you can pick. But that was kind of like reason number one. The second reason was kind of like a combination of things. So I get a lot of people saying, like you can't climb the high elo on high ping. Obviously, I'm not the only person that has done stuff like this, so I think that's kind of already been disproven. But I also hear a lot that like if you don't have good mechanics, like you can't climb the high elo. And putting aside the fact that even if you don't have good mechanics, you can train your mechanics, right? Like I have a video on mechanics. It's not something that you can't get better at. Like I think it's definitely something that's trainable. But putting aside that fact, like let's say for whatever reason, you just have terrible mechanics and you will never have good mechanics. You can definitely reach high low with bad mechanics. And that's something I've said before, because as with every other skill in League, it's like your skill in League is just an average of all your skills, right? And it's not that mechanics aren't important, because mechanics are very important, but there's a bunch of other things that are very important as well, right? And because it's an average, like if you're bad at, like you're bad mechanically, or you have bad movement or whatever, if you've got like great game knowledge and laning and stuff like that, that's going to make up for the fact that you have bad mechanics. Again, it's not to say that mechanics aren't important, because if you have good mechanics, it goes a very long way. But I wanted to kind of disprove that and say that you can, if you do have bad mechanics, again, like obviously you can train them, but you can play champions that aren't mechanically difficult. You can rely on kind of like your game sense and stuff like that. Essentially, there's other ways to kind of carry and play. So what are the things I think make it really difficult on high ping? I would say probably everything to do with the early game is really hard. So the things that I think, high ping especially affects is hitting skill shots and dodging skill shots. And mid lane, of all the lanes, just happens to be the one that has by far the most skill shots in it. So I found a lot of champions and matchups that I'd be very happy playing with or playing against on low ping, and I guess playing with as well, to be very difficult. Like Syndra was a champ that I felt like I couldn't play on high ping, and I also just could not play against on high ping because she's so skill shot reliant, both dodging them and hitting them, obviously, if you're playing her, that if you just can't dodge them, like, you just can't really play against a champ. At least that's kind of how I felt. On top of that, another thing about the early game that is pretty difficult is CSing. So obviously CSing on 200 ping is not the easiest. And you'll kind of see again with my champ choices that I tried to pick champs that could CS pretty easily, like either by kind of method CSing that I talk about, like prepping the wave and grouping it all up and then just one-shotting it with an ability, or, champs that for the most part, at least aside from the very first few levels, can just last hit with their abilities as opposed to with their autos, because it is just a lot more difficult on high ping. And I think even with that in mind, kind of picking champs to try and amplify my CSing, I still think I averaged, far lower CS. So that was another kind of challenge. And I think the reason that affects the early game the most is just because, again, it's like the first part of the game, right? So naturally, like if you're falling behind early game, like that affects the rest of the game. Whereas like if you have good CS early game and then you kind of fall off in CS later on, that's like not too bad, because at least you've had like the good early game, right? And then also, like, again, because I was trying to play champs that needed to kind of reach a point to where they could one-shot the wave, as the game went on and I kind of got that AP that I needed to group the wave, CSing actually became pretty easy. But definitely those first, like, 5 minutes of CSing was, really, really hard. Another thing that I kind of found difficult is because of the champs that I was playing, a lot of them aren't typically the best blind picks. Like I tried to play stuff that were decent blind picks, but I definitely felt blind picking on high ping was way more difficult because champions that I normally would blind pick at the moment would be stuff with kind of mobility and works in lots of comps, and honestly just like champs I'm more comfortable on as well. So like when I play on low ping on my main server, like right now I like to blind champs like LeBlanc or Ari because again, they're quite safe while still having carry potential, and they've got a lot of mobility. Whereas there were games I played on high ping where, I didn't feel like I could play either of those champs because they have too many skill shots or, CSing is too hard or whatever. And it kind of felt like it was difficult, I guess, to have a safe blind pick because there were some champs you could blind, but then would be, very hard countered either matchup wise, or maybe they would be very hard countered by anti-mobility. Like a champ like Lux, for example, is a pretty good blind in terms of matchups, but do you want to play Lux against something like Jarvan? I mean, I wouldn't, but you can. Like, if you play it really well, I think you can. But it's definitely making the game harder for yourself than if you have some ability. So I guess, like, in summary, like, all that stuff in the early game, that was very hard. Like, the actual laning itself, hitting the skill shots, dodging them, keeping my CS up, as well as having, like, a good matchup to begin with, that was all really hard. Post 10 minutes though, after I got out of that early game, I actually felt like it wasn't insanely different. Like obviously executing in team fights was a little harder. Like it's harder to execute your combos and stuff, and maybe sometimes in team fights like you don't quite dodge a skill shot that you needed to or something like that. But yeah, honestly, like after the early game, I felt like I was pretty confident I could carry the game, I guess. Like just through, better team fight positioning and like knowing where to be on the map and stuff like that. It was really that early game that was very, very hard, which I think is kind of sucks because I feel like early game is the thing I'm best at and the thing I enjoy the most as well. So to kind of have that skill taken away from me, I think was a little tough. But okay, what about like the actual champs that I think are good on high ping, and why did I choose them? So my most played here was Galio, and I think Galio is a great champion on high ping, especially as a counter pick. So the really nice thing about a champ like Galio is that your combo kind of like, you can do your entire combo in a CC. Like you can hit something like your W or your E and follow up with the remainder of your combo. And that's like really good because there are some champions where if you don't combo them quick enough, like they'll get out of the CC or something. But Galio's not really like that. And Galio, he's also tankier, so if you make some mistakes, like it's not as bad. I also tried to pick, and Galio's one of these, but I also tried to pick champs that weren't too interactive in the laning phase. Obviously Galio is fairly interactive against assassins, but in ranged matchups as Galio, you're mostly just like farming with Q. And I think that was pretty important because I really didn't want to play, like some hyper interactive matchup where I need to be trading at the right times and stuff like that. I really tried to make the game, I guess, like as PvE as possible for the early game, I guess. Which is why I play those champs like, Galio, Lissandra, Lux that have like a lot of push, or just like, Lux, for example, can completely neutralize a lane. After you get your ult, you basically don't need to fight your opponent anymore at all. You can just show hit the wave, which is always very nice. So I felt those champs were really good. Some champs I think might have been underrated that I didn't get to try more. I think Pantheon was pretty good. I didn't have a lot of success with him, but I think Pantheon could actually be pretty good, and I used to play a lot of Pantheon. In fact, quick blast from the past is in 2019, actually, I went to NA and I bootcamped there for 6 weeks, and I hit rank 13 on the NA server. Maybe I'll put a screenshot up or something, but hit rank 13, which I think was 1064 LP at the time, and I played a lot of Pantheon back then. So I really like playing the champ, and I think it is pretty good on high ping, but so often I didn't really have like AP junglers, so I didn't lock it in very often. And then in the games I actually played Pantheon, I think it was a little lucky. It was only a small sample size, I only played it a few times, but I think it could be pretty good. I guess Lissandra, so Lissandra was, I think, probably the most successful overall. I think Lissandra definitely ended up being my blind pick, so I kind of started to, initially I was blinding Galio, or I was picking him in comps where I had a lot of CC, like if I had a Jarvan or a Camille or Rakan or something, I would just lock in the Galio and it was very good. But when it came to just, like, let's say I was like first pick, blind pick, I would just lock in the Lissandra because it's pretty good against most matchups. I mean, there are some matchups that are definitely difficult, but I was kind of just hoping in those matchups that my opponent would be like scared of ganks, or that I would just be able to get past the early game and be able to kind of CC, play for team fights essentially. And I think while my Lissandra win rate was high, I don't think my performance was as good as the Galio, but yeah, in terms of win rate, definitely was the most successful. And I guess one question you guys might be asking is, how does the server compare to other servers? So I've played on all the major servers except for the Chinese super servers. So I've played Korean solo queue twice, I've played NA solo queue once, and I've played EU solo queue once. And in my opinion, NA is definitely the weakest of the major region servers. I think when I went to NA in 2019, because obviously like now it's weird, right? Like I'm playing in master tier games, but I'm not playing like the challenger games. But when I went in 2019 in season 9, I was like in those high challenger games, and I felt like the server was pretty much just like OCE, but with slightly quicker queue times. So I guess if like I were rating them out of 10, I'd put OC at like a 2 and NA at like a 3 for that. And then the other servers, I would say EU is quite a bit higher. I'd say like maybe like a 5, especially as you, or even a 6. I guess you get to higher elo on EU, it's quite a big difference. Korea, I would say is like really good, like maybe like an 8 or a 9. And again, I haven't played on China, so I don't know. The thing is though, like with the differences in servers is you don't really notice it until I would say like at least Diamond 1 or like Master Plus. Like I think below that the servers are fairly similar. I mean maybe there's slight differences, but yeah, I don't think it's huge below that. But definitely as you get higher and higher in the top ranks, you start to notice a difference, particularly because you start to verse like more and more pro players, and obviously like better players, you know, make other players stronger, and just like competition makes everyone stronger, right? So it becomes a better server like that. And I think that's one reason why EU and Korea are a lot stronger than NA, for example. And just maybe to bring it back on topic to close this one out, what other champs do I think, you know, maybe have potential on high ping? Looking through this, I think, you know, Pantheon, as I mentioned, Annie is maybe good. Fizz, I think, has potential. And Nivea, I think, should be good, but I didn't really play it. Let's see, what else we got? I think Vex is a counter. Nico is a counter, maybe. Veigar, I had mixed success with, but, you know, I think it's a champ that could probably work on high ping. Malzahar, obviously, is a champ that is good, but can struggle in the laning phase, which is the main reason I didn't play him more. Lux, we said, was good. Swain, I think, is underrated on high ping. Nautilus should be really, really good. So now that Naut mid is meta, it's definitely a champ that I would have played if I'd known about it back then. But was not getting played before. I think it does have a lot of potential though. And I think some of the ones down here, like Singed, is probably pretty good. But yeah, I mean, I didn't play all the champs, so I don't know for sure. But I think that's going to be pretty much it for this video. It's kind of my thoughts on the whole thing. It was kind of fun overall, but I am glad to go back to playing some other champions. So if you guys want to see a tier list of champs to play on high ping or on 200 ping specifically, maybe, please let me know. Also, if you have any other questions about the high ping experience that I didn't answer in this video, please feel free to comment them below. Otherwise, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one.